The aroma of the carefully prepared feast filled our home, a scent of love and dedication that had taken days to create. Emano and I had poured our hearts into this dinner, eager to reconnect with our son, Maxwell, and his wife, Rebecca. We had been overjoyed when they agreed to come, believing it to be a chance to strengthen our bond. But as I stood there, listening to Rebecca laugh at the meal we had prepared, my heart sank. "This tastes terrible. If I eat this, I'm going to feel sick," she sneered, barely glancing at the dish before her. Her tone was sharp, mocking, and dismissive. I had tasted the food myself. It was perfectly fine. She was just being fussy, I thought, trying to convince myself not to let her words sting. Yet, as I looked over at Emano, I could see the disappointment in his eyes. We had spent 3 long days making sure everything was perfect for this dinner. We had been so excited when we heard Maxwell and Rebecca would be visiting. Looking back, perhaps we had been foolish to get our hopes up. Rebecca's rude attitude, paired with Maxwell's silent compliance, drained the joy from the evening. He said nothing to defend us, simply allowing her words to hang in the air. We felt disconnected from them, foreign in the presence of our own son. Keeping a relationship with Rebecca seemed impossible, and Maxwell's unwillingness to challenge her behavior only deepened our frustration. "Maybe we should set some clear boundaries with her before I talk to her," Emano suggested as he reached for the dish, his voice heavy with unspoken pain. "I am Kendall, a woman in my 70s who has spent her life as a homemaker. I live with my husband, Emano, who is now retired, and together we have a son, Maxwell. We raised him with love, watching him grow into a bright young man. He graduated from a prestigious university, secured a position at a renowned company, and eventually moved to Boston. When he told us he was getting married, we were thrilled. The woman he introduced as his fiancée had seemed lovely. Maxwell assured us that they planned to move closer to us after the wedding, that Rebecca was eager to build a relationship with us. We were hopeful, despite our reservations. True to their word, 2 months after their wedding, Maxwell and Rebecca moved to our town. We eagerly anticipated spending time together, but reality did not match our expectations. Maxwell transferred to a local branch of his company, thinking it would make life easier. Instead, it proved to be more challenging. The real issue, however, was Rebecca. Her spending habits were reckless. Even when Maxwell earned well at headquarters, she had a tendency to overspend. After his transfer, when his paycheck took a slight hit, her habits only worsened. No matter how much he made, she spent nearly all of it, leaving them financially strained. Maxwell, always practical and indifferent to material luxuries, seemed exhausted. He worked long hours, and his visits to us became rare. Rebecca was hardly around either, and despite living so close, we barely saw them. Their move, which had once filled us with hope, began to feel meaningless. It pained us to know Maxwell was struggling. We wanted to help, and though our resources were limited, we sent them $11,000 each month. It was all we could afford with Emano retired, but we wanted to ease Maxwell's burden. He always thanked us, yet his voice carried a weight of exhaustion that tore at our hearts. We tried to support him in other ways, spending time with him, taking him shopping, treating him to meals. When they traveled, we would clean their house, ensuring they had a welcoming space to return to. It wasn't much, but we did what we could. 2 years passed and nothing changed. Maxwell remained trapped in an unrelenting cycle of work and financial strain, and Rebecca's spending habits showed no signs of slowing. We could no longer stand by and watch him suffer. Determined to reconnect, we decided to invite them over for dinner. Knowing Rebecca would not be enticed by a simple meal, we planned a grand feast. I suggested the idea to Emano, though he hesitated, unsure of his culinary skills. Still, he took the initiative, carefully selecting the finest ingredients and preparing the dishes with meticulous care. To our relief, the promise of a lavish dinner worked. Maxwell and Rebecca agreed to come. For 3 days, we worked tirelessly, making sure every detail was perfect. On the afternoon of their visit, they arrived looking weary. Maxwell, in particular, seemed drained, as though carrying an invisible weight. We offered him our bedroom to rest, hoping he could find some solace. Rebecca, however, showed no interest in our efforts. She barely acknowledged us before settling on the couch, engrossed in the television. Then, without warning, she wandered into the kitchen. "Why are you putting in so much effort?" she asked, her tone laced with disdain. Taken aback, we had no time to answer before she continued. "What's the point of all this? Do you actually enjoy doing this? If you've got so much free time, why don't you find a job and make some money?" Retirement must be tough, huh? Her mocking laughter filled the room, sending a chill down my spine. I stepped forward, unable to hold back any longer. Isn't it rude to speak like that when you've been invited for a meal? Show some respect for your in-laws. A little courtesy wouldn't hurt. Rebecca's face darkened. Are you trying to pick a fight with me? You think your words don't hurt. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. I had only wanted some basic kindness, some acknowledgement of the effort we had put in. But Rebecca twisted my words, turning herself into the victim. Satisfied with her outburst, she stormed back to the living room, leaving Emano and me standing there, disheartened. Before we could process what had happened, her voice rose from the hallway. Why are you always against me? Can't you support me just once? I'm your wife. Alarmed, we rushed to see what was happening. Rebecca stood outside our bedroom, gripping Maxwell's shirt as he looked at her, confused and exhausted. Why won't you back me up? Why are you taking their side? She demanded, her voice shaking with emotion. Maxwell, still groggy from his interrupted rest, tried to understand the situation. Apparently, he had been abruptly woken by a slamming door, only to find Rebecca seething with anger. She had accused me of being the problem, though Maxwell had no idea what had transpired between us. Caught in her fury, he remained silent, unsure of what to say. Rebecca took his hesitation as betrayal, her anger escalating. Maxwell, drained and helpless, stood frozen, stuck between his wife and his parents. We could only watch as the rift between us deepened, unsure of how to bridge the growing distance. As the tension in the room thickened, I could no longer hold back. Looking Rebecca in the eye, I confronted her, my voice steady but firm. It's not okay to wake your exhausted husband up just to yell at him. Do you realize how strange you're acting? Feeling cornered, Rebecca muttered a half-hearted apology, though her expression lacked any real remorse. The hostility lingered in the air, but despite everything, we still sat down for dinner. Emano and I had prepared a feast, juicy steaks, fresh seafood, and the finest ingredients we could offer. We had hoped that a good meal might soften the atmosphere, even if just a little. Maxwell seemed to appreciate the effort, but Rebecca merely eyed the food with disdain. Her lips curled into a smirk as she remarked sarcastically, "Just because you serve this doesn't mean I'll forgive the way I've been treated." Her words stung. After days of effort, this was the response we received? Maxwell tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes and steering the conversation toward happier topics, but Rebecca shut down every attempt. Frustrated, I looked at her and said, "You really need to change your attitude." She heard me. I knew she did. But instead of responding, she deliberately ignored my words, acting as if I hadn't spoken at all. A silent dismissal. Feeling defeated, I turned to Emano, who placed a comforting hand on mine. We maintained our composure, not wanting to ruin the evening further. But then Rebecca took a bite of her meal and recoiled in exaggerated disgust. "What is this disgusting mess?" she shrieked, her face twisting in revulsion. "I'll be sick from eating this." A mocking laugh followed, sharp and cutting, leaving me momentarily speechless. "You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Trying to make me sick?" she continued, her tone thick with accusation. "You go to such lengths to torment me. You're truly a wicked mother-in-law." Her words dripped with contempt, each syllable landing like a slap. My hands trembled under the weight of her cruelty. How could she be so heartless? Did she not see how tired Maxwell was, how much he was struggling? Why did she feel no responsibility to help him? Why did she so easily dismiss the kindness we had shown? Before I could find the words to respond, Emano reached for his plate. His usual calm demeanor had cracked, revealing something much more formidable beneath. "I've stayed quiet until now," he said, his voice dangerously low. "But I've had enough." There was no mistaking his anger. It simmered just beneath the surface, controlled yet intense. It had been years since I had seen him this upset. With finality, he declared, "I'm cutting ties with you. Leave now." His voice boomed through the dining room, catching Rebecca off guard. For the first time, a flicker of shock crossed her face. "Father-in-law, how can you say that to your daughter-in-law?" she snapped, her eyes welling with indignant tears. "Do you enjoy making trouble?" But Emano remained unfazed. "Call it harassment if you like," he said coldly. "I can't consider you part of this family anymore. Leave." His words struck her like a slap of reality. Rebecca's lips trembled before she let out a bitter laugh. "Fine. I'll go. From now on, I want nothing to do with you or your mother. You'll regret this," she spat, hurriedly gathering her things before storming out. I glanced at Maxwell, half expecting him to chase after her, to plead for her to stay. But he didn't move. Instead, he sighed, staring down at his plate. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, avoiding our eyes. For the first time in years, our home felt peaceful. Maxwell stayed with us that night, and for the first time in a long while, we shared a quiet evening together. We reminisced about old camping trips, told stories, and even laughed, a rare sound that had become unfamiliar in Maxwell's presence. The couch, now cramped with him sitting between us, reminded me of how much he had grown. And yet, at that moment, he still felt like our little boy. But the peace was short-lived. The next morning, the sharp sound of the doorbell shattered the silence, followed by frantic pounding. A voice, shrill and filled with anger, echoed through the hallway. "Mother-in-law, I know you're in there. Where's Maxwell? He's here, right? Let him out." A sense of dread settled over me. Rebecca, MNO, Maxwell, and I exchanged glances. We knew that simply ignoring her wouldn't make her leave, and sending Maxwell out would only escalate things. So, we decided to face her head-on. As the door swung open, Rebecca stormed inside, her eyes blazing with fury. "You think you can steal my husband? That's outrageous," she shouted, her voice shaking with frustration. But her accusations no longer had any effect on me. I was beyond caring. "That's a harsh thing to say," I replied calmly. "We only offered him a place to stay because of how you've been treating him. He made that decision, not me. It's unfair to blame me." For the first time, Rebecca's face flushed, not with anger, but with embarrassment. "You and your husband are the worst," she hissed. "Stay away from us forever." Her threats meant nothing. MNO and I were prepared to cut ties with her for good. The tension thickened, the air suffocating, until Maxwell broke the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, something final. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "Let's get a divorce." The words hit Rebecca like a wrecking ball. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "A divorce? Seriously?" Her voice cracked as she stared at him. "You're choosing your parents over me?" Desperation seeped into her tone, but Maxwell remained unmoved. "A wife who neglects her responsibilities and parties all the time versus my parents, who've always been there for me," he said. "The choice is clear." Rebecca's pleas grew more frantic. "Please don't say such things. I love you. Please reconsider." Then something happened that none of us expected. Maxwell raised his hand and struck Rebecca across the face. The room fell into stunned silence. Rebecca touched her cheek in disbelief, her eyes filling with tears. "You've been a burden to me and to your parents," Maxwell said, his voice laced with years of pent-up frustration. "Aren't you ashamed? I tried to help you see sense, but I was wrong." Rebecca, defeated, stood frozen. Any further argument was pointless. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door. The following days were filled with legal proceedings. Maxwell stayed with us as he filed for divorce, but Rebecca refused to sign the papers, forcing lawyers to get involved. Fortunately, Maxwell had documented proof of her reckless spending habits, which helped finalize the process. He even sought compensation for the health problems caused by years of stress and overwork, which had recently been diagnosed as a lifestyle-related illness. Eventually, Rebecca's parents paid the settlement, leaving Maxwell with a lingering sense of guilt. Meanwhile, Rebecca, now left to fend for herself, was forced to work hard to repay her debts. Though Maxwell has since moved on, he stayed with us for a while, finding solace in our home after years of turmoil. Today, he has regained his footing, working hard to rebuild his life. No matter what challenges come his way, we will always be here for him, ready to support him in any way we can.